Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Classical Academy podcast, your friendly guide to the world of classical Christian education. I'm Shay Ramquist, the producer of the podcast, filling in for our regular host, Dr. Mark Phillips. And I'm filling in because today's guest is none other than Dr. Phillips himself. Mark is a trained biochemist. He also holds a master's and a doctorate in theology and biblical apologetics with a degree from the University of Oxford. Mark has worked as an animal surgeon, pastor, missionary, and stand-up comedian. And these days, in addition to hosting our podcast, Mark serves as the chair of the Department of Theology and Science here at Trinity Classical Academy. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shay. It's great to be here as a guest today. Yes.
I'm excited to talk with you about something you know well, this idea of intelligent design that we teach in our science classes.
Yes.
So as we dive into this fascinating topic, can you help us understand just in general, why do we teach and have our students study intelligent design in a classical Christian education?
Of course. The first step of science is observation. And so one thing an honest scientific observer will note is there is the appearance of design, all the way from cosmology, all the way down to molecular biology within the cell. So that's the first thing is design is there, and honest scientists admit it, and we observe it. So we should teach what we observe. Secondly, it helps to strengthen the faith of the student by realizing that God has made himself obvious in what the Belgian Confession calls the second book, which is the book of nature. The Psalms tell us that the heavens declare the glory of God, and indeed they do. And we see throughout creation that God makes himself obvious when we read his book of nature. And thirdly, it helps us to prepare to further share the gospel with unbelievers. There's a movement within our culture right now that's been here for quite some time now of scientism, believing science is the ultimate and final authority. It is not, but because that is such a prevalent cancer upon our society, approaching apologetics with a clear understanding of the scientific arguments for the God of the Bible, i.e. intelligent design especially, that helps us to be able to share, as Peter says, always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that is within you. And these are indeed good reasons. That Greek word is apologion, where we get apologetics. So that is why we do it.
Well, that sounds pretty great. It sounds like it helps us understand science better, understand God better, and be better able to engage with our culture and help share the gospel with them. But maybe we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves.
Sure.
What is this awesome thing, intelligent design, that we're teaching in our science class?
So intelligent design, the proper definition would be it is a theory that what we observe, again, there's that first step, a theory that what we observe in nature is best explained by an intelligent cause, not random, undirected causes. And so this is a response really to Darwinism and now what we call neo-Darwinism. Neo-Darwinism is the mechanism of how this idea of origin of life and radically changing of one species to another, it takes place through genetic mutations that just happen at just the right time when natural forces are giving advantage to that mutation. And that's neo-Darwinism. And modern intelligent design is a response to that. It's been around for a long time. Keen observers, all the way back to Plato and Cicero, and then later on Jewish thinkers like Maimonides and this great scholar Thomas Aquinas, they talked about intelligent design. Then when the scientific revolution occurred, it occurred within Christianized Europe. It was stout believers who brought about modern science. I think we've discussed that on a previous podcast before. They went into their study of science expecting to see God's handiwork, expecting to see design, therefore. So the idea has been around for a long time. The difference with the modern intelligent design movement is that it is post-Darwin. And in other words, instead of this expectation to find design, design found us. The more we learned, especially about cosmology and molecular biology at the cellular level, the more we learned about these things, the more evident it was there was a handy worker behind all of this. So the modern intelligent design movement is a very good response to Darwinism. It's not just a negative response saying, oh, things are just so complex, it couldn't be random. There has to be a God behind it. That's kind of the negative argument against Darwinism. The positive argument for intelligent design is that if something looks designed, it probably is.
Okay.
In fact, Francis Crick, one of those, the famous Watson-Crick team at Cambridge.
Yeah, DNA and all that, right?
Right, known for actually delineating the structure of DNA, the 4 bases on the DNA helix, what's the ribose phosphate backbone, which the students learn. They delineated the structure. And it became evident really about 10 years after this was done, it became evident there was a code within the structure. And so Watson and Crick themselves, they were teaching their students and saying, remember, you must remember, this is not designed, right? And the reason they're saying that, of course, is because it looks designed. It's like that animal walking and waddling across the floor of our classroom, wagging its tail with its big orange webbed feet and quacking is not a duck. And that's pretty much what they're saying. Design is hitting us stronger and stronger in our faces every single year with every new discovery at the molecular level of biology.
Okay, so if I'm tracking you, you're saying that one of the moves Darwin made was saying it's all just random chance, and through random mutation, certain species survive, they flourish, and that's how we end up with all the different species today.
Yes.
Intelligent design comes back in this new version and saying, wait a second.
Hey, Don.
It's not quite as random as it looks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You had the Enlightenment movement and the Age of Reason, and there were some good things there, obviously. But what kept happening was this emergence of man as the pinnacle. Mm-hmm. And so the natural place from that, of course, is to displace God from his throne. And then the next natural step is he's not necessary. What Darwin did is he provided a means to make God unnecessary for the unity and diversity and complexity of life by coming up with this idea of natural selection, which we do observe in nature. But when we observe, say, Darwin's finches on the Galapagos Islands, the rainy islands, the smaller finches seem to do better. The drier islands, the larger finches are going to do better. But what happened was they're making this huge jump from dry islands favoring large-beak finches, rainy islands favoring small-beak finches, to, oh, look, the finch has turned into a cat. Right? And this jump is not only untenable, it's become more unreasonable in light of the modern intelligent design movement. And that's why we teach it. And there is this idea in science called methodological materialism. It's a term the kids learn early on, the 9th grade. Then it gets pounded again into them over and over the second semester. And it's this idea in science that you can only do science with answers found only in nature. The methodological materialism, matter. So the method of science you can only find answers in matter. And so intelligent design challenges one of the central dogmas of what I call the Darwinian Gestapo of science. It challenges this idea and says, well, wait a minute. If something looks designed, why not do what science has always done, which is to defer to the best possible answer? And that's why it's defined the way it is. It doesn't come out and say the God of the Bible is true. That's not its point. There's some challenges to that, but overall, its point is to say, wait a minute, if we are going to do good science, then let's defer to the best possible explanation. What's the best explanation for the programming of DNA? A programmer, right? What's the best explanation for the circular causality of the central teaching of biology, which is how proteins are built? maybe an architect. And so that's where the intelligent design movement comes in and challenges Darwinism. And by doing that, you're challenging the central idea that displaced God in the 1800s. And by doing so, it opens us back up to him as the cause of all of this.
Yeah, so in methodological materialism or methodological naturalism,
Yes.
it's a closed system. There's nothing from the outside that can get
Correct.
in, right? And so just everything that we see, it's just solid all the way through.
Yes.
Very depressing and very hopeless. But
it is, indeed.
I think what you're saying is in intelligent design, when we see what looks like design, we can say, oh, there is someone on the outside, a designer that's created all these things.
Yes. And Christians for a long time were accused, rightfully so at some points, of what's called the God of the gaps. In other words, God was used as the reason to fill in the gaps of what wasn't known. You go all the way back to not just Christians, but Greek mythology, lightning bolts, Zeus is angry,
Sure.
right? And so even with modern science that was birthed out of Christianized Europe, if something wasn't understood, they said, well, then it must be God. And then as the understanding came, that God gets smaller and smaller and smaller until the God of the gaps disappears because the gaps have supposedly been filled. But what has happened is that the increased knowledge has created naturalism of the gaps. Yes, we know DNA is a very complex code. Our computer codes are binary, ones and zeros. DNA is quaternary, A's, T's, G's, and C's, much more complex. Even Bill Gates himself said, we don't have any concept of software as complicated as DNA. We're nowhere near this. Intelligent design comes in there and says, you see, we got something more complicated than the computers, and nobody believes that software is written randomly. It's done by computer engineers, by software engineers, programmers. But methodological materialism says we can't go there. So it says eventually, this is the naturalism of the gaps, eventually we'll figure it out. But the problem is that gap's getting larger and larger because as we learn more and more in trying to figure out the code, where it came from, other things happen that also look design, and it becomes secondary, tertiary, quaternary, and it gets deeper and deeper, and the chasm between a naturalistic explanation and design gets larger and larger with all of the evidence supporting design, and that's why we teach a term I came up with here, naturalism of the gaps. Eventually we'll figure it out, but the problem is that eventually is getting further and further away. The God of the gaps, there's no such thing anymore.
So we're getting more and more signs of design in modern science.
Yes.
And it's becoming more and more of a challenge for the modern naturalistic scientist who doesn't want to believe in God to explain, what are you going to do with all this seeming design? And when you say we teach a naturalism of the gaps, we teach that that's what other people are doing, right? That's not our perspective.
Yeah, we only teach the term. I just made up that term because
that helps.
Where can they go? It helps them understand.
Yeah.
The God of the gaps, that God would get smaller and smaller as gaps were filled.
Yeah.
But the gaps that were filled have turned into design arguments.
Yeah.
And so, we do understand how DNA operates now, but we don't know where the programming came from. And we don't know why it carries the messages it carries. And by studying DNA, we've now found there are secondary messengers involved. And there's this whole new field called epigenetics. And so it's just getting worse and worse for the poor naturalist who wants to stick to methodological materialism.
Yeah. Yeah. If only there was another option for them.
Yes.
Now, I want to ask you a little bit about how we do teach intelligent design to the students themselves. But before we get to how we do this in the classroom, I just want to ask, we also, I think, teach creationism as a framework for understanding, right, where the universe and the world came from.
Yes.
Is that the same thing as intelligent design? Are they different? Are they overlapping? How do they mix together?
Yes, they overlap, but they are not the same thing. Now, every intelligent design proponent I've personally met, And I did have the privilege of getting certified at the Intelligent Design Institute in Seattle at the Discovery Center there. And everyone I met there was a creationist Christian. All right, some believe in young earth creation, some in old earth creation, but that's so secondary to them. What's important is they all agree God created everything. So they are creationists. But intelligent design is not creationism. It is looking at what exists and seeing design in it. The only time it talks about where it came from is in discussing the problems with naturalistic explanations.
Yeah.
We've been doing what's called OOL, O-O-L, origin of life research, really heavily since the 1980s. It became fascinating as we started cracking the genetic code. They realized, maybe we'll be able to figure out where life came from now. But the problem is, origin of life research is not only failing to be any closer to naturalistic explanation, but again, naturalism of the gaps. They're further away than ever because the more they researched it, the more they have realized naturalistic explanations don't work.
Yeah.
One of the things we teach the kids is that origin of life researchers are some of the brightest minds in the world with some of the finest labs and some of the finest technology and purest racemically pure chemicals in the world, which are necessary. Mm-hmm. And they come up and they say, we've built a cell. But what they've really done is they've taken RNA out of one cell and put it into another. So it's like taking a Ford engine, putting it into a Chevy, and saying we've built a car. So what has happened was we ask a simple question. Excuse me, were these intelligent minds and these laboratories and this technology and these pure chemicals around in primordial Earth? In other words, in order for them to do something like move RNA from one cell to another, which is simply moving one engine into another engine, in order for them to do that, it takes enormous corroboration, collaboration, technology, bright minds, things that don't fit into the naturalistic, random, undirected cause explanation. And so the students learn this.
Yeah.
And they're specifically asked on the question, what is the biggest problem with the origin of life research? And they go into it and they talk about these things that are involved in origin of life research weren't around in some supposed primordial soup.
Yeah.
For which there's no evidence for, by the way.
Right. Okay. So it looks like when we teach this with our students, there's some really clear applications in biology, like you're saying, where we're teaching DNA and origin of life questions.
Indeed.
Are there other ways in which we teach this to the students?
Yes. So there's three main things in biology. In fact, I reiterate it in the physiology class. We just did it on Grandparents' Day.
Yeah.
And that is, what is intelligent design? They reiterate the definition, the theory that what we observe in nature is best explained by an intelligent cause, not random undirected causes. And then, what are the three things in biology that best support intelligent design? There are numerous, but these are the three top ones. And it's number one, it's programming. The DNA is programmed code. They learn how the code works their first semester of their freshman year in building proteins. Programming requires a programmer.
Yeah.
Number two, circular causality. What the DNA programs for primarily is how to build proteins. It's an architect. Proteins are made of amino acids. There's 20 of them. We put them together like letters. So just like we can put 26 letters together in gibberish, or we can put them together in a meaningful sequence to make a meaningful sentence, paragraph, chapter, book, it's the same thing with amino acids. Typical protein has 250 amino acids in line. Now, out of those 20 amino acids, they all have to be in the proper order. So that's 250 to the 20th power.
It's a big number.
Yeah, that's for a typical protein. Some of them are thousands of amino acids long. It becomes astronomically impossible. Well, all of that is programmed in the DNA. But here's what's interesting. In order to access the DNA, it takes specific proteins to unwind the helix to access the code. So the code for building that particular protein is in the DNA, but I can't get to the DNA without that protein. but I can't build that protein without the code in the DNA, but I can't get to the code without the protein, can't build it. You got it.
Okay.
So that's circular causality.
Yeah.
And that is known as the central dogma of biology, is DNA codes for messenger RNA, builds proteins. So the very central dogma of biology creates this circular causality problem.
Yeah.
And then the third one is...
Wait, just so I'm following for that second one. I think what you're saying is you need a protein in order to build a protein.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So like, where does that original protein come from?
Exactly.
We're in trouble. And when we're talking about proteins, I'm not just talking about my protein bar, right? We're talking about inside the cell.
Yes.
You know?
There are thousands and thousands of different proteins.
That's right. Yeah.
And they're the workhorses of the cell.
Right.
If you took all the water out of a cell and weighed it, 90% of that weight would be protein. They're the workhorses. They do everything.
Okay.
They're structural, hormonal, immunal, enzymes, which speed up biological processes.
So it's
So
not
they're
just
the main
about
things.
proteins for getting, really muscular. Right? You're
Correct.
talking about
Yes.
just actually the muscular, or what moves the cells themselves
Yes,
down
they
at
are
the cellular
the functional,
level.
structural, and functional aspects of the cell.
The
right?
third thing then in biology.
Yeah. And so the third thing is irreducible complexity. Right? You can't take away any part without destroying the function of that cell, or you can't take away any function without the cell dying.
Yeah.
And we now know that in molecular biology and in cell physiology, it's a very complex thing, and you can't take away a part of it. So how did it gradually build itself through evolution? Well, it can't, because it wouldn't live long enough waiting around for all the parts to come in, because all the parts are needed for the cell to live and carry out its function.
Yeah.
So those three things in biology.
Yeah.
Now, outside of biology, you're asking, there's cosmology. In cosmology, we see the need for a creator, because we now know it's very little argument that the universe had a beginning.
Yeah.
We talk about how that's demonstrated primarily through two things. The redshift shows the universe is expanding, and it's expanding faster and faster.
Yeah.
As the galaxies get further away from each other, the gravitational pull on them is less and less. So gravity has lost the war, and the universe will continue to expand. It's really big, but it's not infinitely large, meaning it hasn't been expanding forever, meaning it hasn't been around forever.
Yeah.
Plus, if you go backwards in time, it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller until, poof, it's no longer there. So we know it had a beginning. The other thing is entropy. People have heard of universal entropy. The universe is basically running out of usable energy.
Yeah.
We haven't reached that point yet because there hasn't been enough time. Infinity would have been enough time. It hasn't been around forever. So that tells us there is a creative force. Even Stephen Hawking, in his first paper with Penrose, Hawking was at Cambridge, Penrose at Oxford, he capitalized causal agent because he was married at the time to a very devout Christian woman. The idea that there's a causal agent, it doesn't end there, because you get closer and closer to the God of the Bible with these observations, because you know there's one creative force. If there wasn't, the universe would be in chaos. It's orderly. We also see fine-tuning. Well, fine-tuning is personality behind it. So you get pretty close to the God of the Bible.
Yeah.
This personal yet infinite God who created everything.
Yeah.
And so those are the two main arguments. Of course, there are numerous.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that we, this probably comes up in other sciences as well. I think you told me before, maybe chemistry or physics as well. And
Sure.
I would love to hear more, but
Yeah, I know.
For the sake of time,
Yes.
I want to ask, do the students respond to this? Does this change the way they think? Does it change them as scientists, as Christians? What do you see in the classroom as you're teaching these ideas about intelligent design to them?
Yeah, I do. Some immediately, which
Sure.
it's starting at the freshman level. But through the years, I see it developing. And some of the greatest evidence is alum that come back. And they come in and they visit. And they say, Dr. P, I got to tell you, I was in anthropology class, and we were talking about the origin of man, and that took us all the way back to the origin of life. And I realized just how silly their arguments were. And I was actually able to engage in the class with the professor. I said, how'd it go? He says, it was rough,
Yeah.
but but I held my own.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to thank you for that. And I actually started remembering things I thought I had forgotten from my freshman year here. So sometimes it's the alum who validate as they mature, these ideas they learned here mature within them.
Yeah.
They're almost like planting seeds.
Yeah.
Some, it fruits very quickly. Others, I don't see the fruited tree till they've been out of college for a few years. But it's there.
And it seems so important to prepare this ground for them before they leave for
Yes.
college, to not think that once I go to my science classes, I need to leave Christianity behind because,
Yes.
in the real world,
Correct.
Science is going to be showing me all these reasons why God doesn't exist.
Yes.
And, we're in this methodological, materialistic
So
trap.
true. So
Yeah.
true. Unfortunately, a lot of Christian education just Christianizes secular science, so to speak. And that's what happens. Oh, I don't have to Christianize it anymore.
Yeah.
Intelligent design, it's very different. It is a part of the science. You see it everywhere. It becomes impossible, I'm hoping, for the student when they're reading their textbook and it says something like, what this enzyme does is, they hear, oh yeah, this enzyme has a purpose.
Yeah.
Some textbooks, it slips up and they'll actually get the word purpose in there sometimes, as careful as they try to avoid it. A study was done at Boston University and other places on K-5 through second grade students. And they showed them objects and living things. And inherently, they asked the question, does this have meaning? Is it designed, or is it just did it just happen by accident? Overwhelmingly, they say it's designed. Not seeing design, not seeing a creator, not seeing a God must be taught to these human beings. Because as Imago Dei creatures, it's natural for us to see God's handiwork in everything. That's why even Greek philosophers like Plato and Jewish philosophers like Maimonides, that's why they talk about it, because that's the natural place we go. If it looks designed, it is designed. And to fellow scientists, I just say, get over it, relax, chill out. There's implications, so be it. Let's be honest scientists and lean to the best possible explanation for what we observe.
So it seems like teaching this makes our students better scientists.
I would hope
than
so.
Other people. Also, I think what you're saying too is not only the heavens declare the glory of God, but the cell itself and inside of it declares His glory.
We did not really definitively conclude the universe had an origin until the 1920s with Einstein's space-time theorems, Hubble's work down here at Mount Palomar. It was resisted for a long time. Then 1960s, the cosmic background was discovered. 1990s, we sent up a COBE satellite specifically for this purpose. Had we been assuming that the Bible's true, I believe science would have been way ahead of itself in cosmology, because they would have been looking for an explanation to the beginning of the universe. But they weren't. They wanted to believe it was static, that it had always existed, and that kept us from discovering it until late in the 20th century.
Yeah.
Probably would have been discovered much sooner. Science would advance much faster if people looked for design because they were expecting it, because they know God's behind it.
Yeah. Well, this has been some pretty heady stuff, but I think it's got some vital implications for our students here at Trinity and as they progress in their lives.
That's the hope.
So if someone who's listening, they're a parent of a Trinity student or a grandparent or relative or just a friend, what are some questions that you think they should ask their student to provoke a good conversation about intelligent design?
Sure. I would ask them, what do you think is the strongest evidence for intelligent design? Make sure they remember what it is first, because I know some of them don't remember the exact definition. Sometimes they might put on the test and they're going to get it wrong. Intelligent design is we believe that there's a creator. That's an X mark. That's not the definition. So make sure. Say, why don't you go grab your notes, tell me what intelligent design is, and then I'd like to hear what you think is the strongest evidence for it and why.
Yeah.
That will spark a wonderful conversation. And listen, parents, if you've got some students in freshman year, some students in anatomy, physiology, even chemistry, chemistry also. We just talked about perfect sharing of electrons last week in chemistry. There are 7 elements that do that. And 7 is the number of perfection in the Bible, and they form a 7 on the periodic table. I mean, come on. God is screaming at us, students. That's what I tell them. So ask them those questions. What do you think is the strongest argument?
Yeah. Well, Mark, thank you for leading our science department and theology department here at Trinity in these directions, forming these young minds in such really important ways. And thanks for sharing some of that with us on the podcast today.
Such a privilege. Thank you.
And thank you, listener, for joining us on the Classical Academy podcast, which is presented by Trinity Classical Academy here in Santa Clarita, California. If you want to hear more about the unique education offered at Trinity, give a listen to our school's other podcast called Different by Design. I'm the producer of this podcast, and Cameron Hubbard is our audio engineer. Until next time, let's all continue to grow in wisdom, in virtue, and in love of the wonderful designer we serve, God Himself.
Amen.